According to the Pew Research Center, an estimated 64 million Americans live in multifamily and multi-generational households. Chris Lento is the managing member of EM Capital LLC, and he has over 16 years of experience in multifamily real estate investing. Chris is focused on acquiring commercial multifamily apartment complexes in markets all across the country which exhibit positive growth trends. Chris is passionate about the role that well-managed and well-maintained economic housing solutions can have in helping to alleviate some of the housing crises in America. He joined me this week to tell me about his work and why he believes that affordable housing should be something granted to everyone. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. So, Chris, if you're ready, I'll welcome you to the program, and I'm excited to talk to you about a real estate investment and what keeps you busy in Boston. Great to be with you this afternoon, and thanks so much for being here.
Great, yeah, nice to be here as well.
So, Chris, just before we dive into your day job, I'm curious to know how one goes from being a rocket scientist to being into real estate investments.
Well, first, I kind of want to caveat the rocket scientist definition. So I did work as an electromechanical engineer for 15 years on designing and testing guidance systems for missiles. But I will say, when you're in that world, you don't usually refer to yourself as a rocket scientist. You refer to yourself as an engineer. But it sort of impresses people and is descriptive of what I did, but I wouldn't say I was breaking new ground with the invention of rocket science. That being said, shortly after college, I was living in a rental property and just started kind of looking around. Never knew anything about how the real estate market worked, and said, gee, we're paying a fair amount with 3 other roommates. Who owns this place? How did he buy it? How does this work? Why am I paying so much a month, and to who? So I just sort of got interested in it and, started reading some books and then bought my first 3-family about a year later and lived in it and, fixed up a couple of units, refinanced it, bought another one and just sort of thought of it as a side career. Like, oh, if I do this for the next 20 years, I'll have a good side income and that'll be great. Maybe I can retire early. And then as I sort of, rose in the ranks of my company and I started getting to the point where I could see sort of where my career trajectory would go, after say 12 years or so, I didn't love it that much. It involved a lot of travel. It involved not a lot of self-direction. When you're in the defense industry, the projects are big. You don't have a ton of influence in their direction. So I continued to grow my real estate portfolio on the side. And then shortly before I had my daughter, I started thinking, all right, how do I transition this into a full-time career that has more flexibility and I can kind of control my life more.
Yeah, fantastic. And I know that you're passionate about the way well managed and economically affordable housing can help sort of people get off onto the right foot in terms of laying the foundation. So I'm wondering if we can expand on that a little bit as well.
Yeah, sure. Good question. I've been doing rental properties for 18 years now, and 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 housing is a complicated issue. It's a complicated issue everywhere, but I think especially in America, it's an area where people's lives intersect with for-profit businesses at a very intimate level. So everyone needs a place to live, um, and and then you have businesses who are trying to profit off of that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but it creates difficult situations for many people, especially where there's a shortage of lower cost housing and a shortage of subsidized housing. And there's been a lot of studies that show the positive impact of having stable housing on a whole host of social issues, uh, like drug addiction, domestic abuse. I mean, just the basics of having a clean, safe, stable place to live that's consistent, it impacts a lot of those issues. So it's something that I'm interested in, and I'm interested in trying to figure out, how I can help. Um, and I believe that, my business model, which is really to purchase poorly managed, somewhat rundown apartment complexes, and then manage them properly, treat the residents with respect, resolve issues in a timely manner, um, remedy any deferred maintenance, and really provide just a place where people can live that's safe, secure, they can be proud of, and they're treated with respect. And I think that's it's not solving the problem by any means. It's a very complicated problem, but I think it adds to it helps, and I'm proud of that.
Yeah, I tell you, common decency and respect go a long way, don't they?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Just treating people like they're people, and not problems or numbers, or really, I think goes a long way.
Absolutely. And I'm curious. I'm curious for you as the investor. How do you determine what makes a good real estate investment, and how you get the maximum return when it comes to the return on your own investment?
All right, well, that's an easier question, other than housing for America. Um, So basically, I partner with equity investors or passive investors to purchase properties. So I have a very rigid requirement that a property needs to meet in order for me to be interested. So I look at a property and I predict what my first year will look like with the maintenance upgrades that are needed and management changes. And then I predict what I think my cash flows will be for the 5-year period. I usually hold a property between 3 and 7 years, and it needs to return cash flow of 6 to 8% to my investors per year over that 5-year period. And then additionally, based on the improvements I make and my assumptions about what price I can sell it at, it needs to return an additional 45 to 60% return on my investors' investment at the sale. So that makes a combined annualized rate of return of in the 16 to 20% range. So in that way, having investors sort of makes it easy. I mean, you just can't fall in love with a property. It has to meet your criteria, because that's the criteria that you believe your investors, or that I believe, my investors are interested in. Um, so it's relatively cut and dry.
And when we talk about growth trends, because I know one of the ways you determine what you're going to invest in is positive growth trend in a community. So I'm wondering what factors go into neighborhood revitalization for you, and how do you determine positive growth trends?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And that could be you know, a whole long conversation on its own. But there's a number of resources that I use to determine the trends, but they all really boil down to population growth, job growth, and what's driving those trends. So, typically government policy or government initiatives will start a trend. So they'll have maybe it's a business friendly environment. There's tax benefits for businesses to move in. Could be there's growing educational resources that are making companies want to move there. But job growth or policies that support job growth typically start the cycle. And then once jobs become available, people move there, population's growing, and those are all trends that at a macro level just only mean good things for real estate investing, because you know that your supply, that your demand is going to be greater than your supply, because it takes years to permit and build new multifamily properties. So I'm really looking for that population growth and job growth, which tends to be supported by good government. So you want to know what your local government's doing. How are they incentivizing businesses, incentivizing real estate, incentivizing positive growth?
Since you brought up the government, I'm curious to get your thoughts on, since over there in the States, obviously, they've gone through a presidential administration change and some federal government changes. So I'm curious to know if there's been a positive impact since the administration change. And what do you think is the role in government in giving multifamily investors like yourself an opportunity to sort of pay it forward?
So I guess to answer the first part of your question, I think there has been a positive impact to commercial real estate. Well, it's sort of complicated because COVID's an overriding thing over all this,
Mhm.
right? So I'll just speak for multifamily, because the retail market and the office market is still going through some very questionable cycles right now, mainly due to COVID. But in the multifamily market, yeah, I do think the new administration has affected the multifamily market positively. In a large degree, I think that's just due to certainty, right? So when there's uncertainty, people don't make decisions. They hold their money on the sidelines, and the whole election cycle, and even the last administration towards the end, just had a large degree of uncertainty. What was going to happen with the economy? Were we going to go to a trade war with China? So I think moving forward, this administration is more transparent about its goals and objectives, and is just less tumultuous. That being said, the federal government does quite a bit to subsidize or to support the multifamily housing industry. There's very good loan programs that are that are serviced by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which are pseudo government agencies, and there's a lot of incentives in there to try to have multifamily operators do what the government feels is best for the country, such as environmental improvements, low-income housing initiatives, tax credits. So there are incentives that the government puts in place, but there are still, I think, significant gaps.
Chris, I'm curious to ask you about your own level of personal satisfaction when you're able to give families, whether they be first-time families or families that aren't looking for a leg up, suitable, safe, and affordable housing. How does that make you feel to give people a chance to be homeowners?
Well, it's a very satisfying feeling. I bought a property in Kentucky in the fall, and the property was in okay shape, but the prior owner had really just not really been responsive to the residents' needs. There was a good amount of bug problems in there. There was deferred maintenance, clogged drains, poorly repaired items. And there was a number of not great tenants, some that were selling drugs. So it needed work. And over the last 6 months, working heavily with my property manager, we met all the residents, spent time figuring out, where the problems were coming from, what the issues were, what are the reasons that some people weren't paying their rent. I mean, we were in the middle of a global pandemic, so many people had very good reasons why they weren't paying their rent. Were they working with us to try to come together with payment plans, or what was going on? And it took a few months to figure this out, to identify, with the help of the residents, mostly, who were the problem residents, who was selling drugs, what the issues were. And then we started, moving those people out, getting good people in, having the maintenance resolved very quickly, just listening to the residents went a long way. And now every week when I talk to my property manager on our weekly meeting, she talks about how, so-and-so resident came up to her when she was over there and said, thank you. This place is so much safer and quieter. And we really like all the improvements, and they seem proud of it. And that's what you're looking for, because then proud residents will recommend it to other residents who take pride in where they live. So it's kind of cool to see a place go from maybe a blight in the neighborhood to be like a well-respected apartment complex. So yeah, I guess pride is one thing.
Absolutely. And I know that you invest in properties from all over the country. So I'm curious to know how you make sure that you have enough capital to invest into the properties that you're interested in.
So I invest in the properties. I put some of my money into every property, but the majority of the equity that I use to pay for the down payment and to put into escrow to do the renovations and upgrades comes from investors that I partner with. So what I do is I have a group of investors who I've been cultivating for years, that I contact regularly and gauge their interest in different kinds of properties. And I sort of know, what, how many there are that are interested, and what amount I can raise at a given time. And then additionally, I work with other people in the industry. So much like any industry, there's conferences, and there's kind of a network of people that you come to meet when you're a commercial real estate investor. So if I had a project that maybe I didn't think I could fund fully, I would reach out to a friend or kind of colleague, I guess you could call them, and say, hey, I have a very interesting property. Would you like to partner on it? I'm going to need help raising some capital, and we'd work together on that particular deal. So it's a combination of growing my investor network and understanding what they're looking for at the time, and then having a network of other operators that I trust and that I would want to work with on a specific property.
And I'm going to follow up with, how do you think is the best way to build positive relationships from investor to investor?
It's a really good question. And I would say it's challenging, especially, when we're all remote right now. But I think to some degree it's time. This is a business where a lot of people are trying to find good deals and make themselves look good on their websites or on their social media. But you have to figure out kind of who they really are, and whether they're the type of person that you want to work with, whether they're trustworthy, whether they have integrity. So I think one is just taking the time to get to know people. And I think two is to sort of add value where you can. So it's not there's plenty of investments for everybody. And I think the people that are quality real estate investors who really like what they do and are in it for the long term, can find each other and work together. So I think, adding value where you can, sending someone over the information they're looking for, sending a spreadsheet, sending over a deal that maybe doesn't work for you, but could work for them. Just adding value where you can. And, I think that goes a long way.
Hey, Chris, I'm curious to ask you about accessible housing for individuals with disabilities. Obviously, uh, sometimes that can be in shorter supply. So as an investor yourself, I'm curious to ask you about, how do you think we can provide more opportunities for folks with disabilities to buy affordable housing?
That's a good question. And to be honest, I haven't thought about it too much. I'll say, there would need to be some sort of economic incentive. So better understanding where, well, first of all, what the needs are of the people with disabilities, whether that's handicapped accessibility, larger doors, there's a whole host of different needs. So for myself, gaining a better understanding of what that means, and then what the costs would be to provide those, whether it be ramps or meeting those needs, and then trying to understand where the economics play out. So whether it's in higher rents, whether it's in a program that subsidizes those upgrades. So like I said, I haven't thought about it too much, but I really, since most of this housing is coming from the for-profit real estate market, how do you best create the business model that supports that goal? That would be my kind of short answer.
Absolutely. And I'm curious to also ask you about people who, in terms of paying rent or paying a mortgage. I'm curious to get your thoughts on the comparison of the two and some of the benefits of living in a multi-family unit versus a standalone house.
So I primarily do rental properties, but I've owned a house, I've owned a condominium. I believe most people, there's a number of categories of renters, and a good percentage of renters, especially in the kind of middle to lower income housing, they're a lot of them are renters for life. They're they're not saving enough that they can get a down payment. Maybe they like the flexibility of renting. So even though many of them may want a home at some point, it's my experience has been many of them are going to be are will be renters kind of for their life cycle. So judging the benefits, that's a long question. I mean, I guess you have flexibility when you rent. You could move. You don't have a big sunk cost of a mortgage or a down payment. But you don't have as much control of your living situation. You could be evicted. The owner could do something with the property. Neighbors could move in you don't like. So I guess you have less control.
Well, I tell you, it's what makes the world go around. Choices, right?
Right, right.
So,
Yep.
Chris, I know you're located in Boston, so I'm curious to know for you, what's the best part about living in Boston?
Um, so I live right in the city, and I like Boston in that it has a somewhat big city feel, but it's a pretty small city. I think we have 650,000 people in the Boston area. Greater Boston area is about 5 million, but it has a lot of amenities as far as sports teams and culture and restaurants that some of larger cities have, but it is nothing like a New York or a Chicago from a true size perspective. And then I like the fact that it's close to a lot of things. I can get to great beaches in an hour. I can get to pretty good ski mountains in 2 hours. There's a lot of things accessible. I can get to New York in 3.5 hours. So I like the amenities the city has to offer, and I really like the area. And I like the fact that I can go for a week without getting in my car and not feel constrained, just biking or walking around. I enjoy that.
And with the price of gas these days, I can appreciate that, Chris.
Right.
So, hey, Chris, when you're not working, buddy, I'm curious. You mentioned going to the beach and being accessible in Boston. So when you're not working, where can we most find you, bud?
Well, I guess a few years ago, I would have said maybe bike riding or skiing or at the beach. But I have a 4-year-old daughter now, and I would say you can probably mostly find me at the park, which is where I am hours a day, it seems like. Yeah, my 4-year-old daughter, Cleo, is really what I am passionate about right now and my family. So, we spend a lot of time kind of riding bikes around and really, I'm not joking. I spend a huge amount of time at our local playground. So, so I'm a regular over there.
Hey, a little active lifestyle starting them early is a good thing,
Right.
Chris.
Yeah.
There's a benefit to that as well. And my final question for you, Chris, is I'm wondering if you've given any thought to your legacy and how you want your life's work to be defined.
Um, I haven't spent a ton of time thinking about that, but I've always strived to have a good work-life balance, even before I really knew what that meant. Kind of growing up, I was never, I always did sports and a lot of activities, but I always wanted to do a broad range of things and learn new things. I was never, solely devoted to one sport or solely focused on academics. I sort of wanted to do a broad range of things, and I think that's sort of gone with me through my life. When I worked for a full-time job, it didn't dominate my life. I didn't work more than 45 hours a week by design. and now that I have a family and I'm balancing this real estate investing career, I pay a lot of attention to trying to do both of those things in moderation and keep learning and keep exploring new areas and meeting new and interesting people and interacting with different ideas. So I guess my legacy, I suppose I would like to be defined as someone who lived a full life and had a positive impact on a broad group of people.
Living life with balance, there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely. And Chris, how can people get connected with you if they're so inclined to do that?
Yeah, sure. My website is emcapitalgroup.com, and I'm EM Capital on LinkedIn, and my email is Chris Lento at emcapitalgroup.com. Other than LinkedIn, I'm not a huge social media person, although I probably need to be in the future to increase my marketing reach. So yeah, website and email are probably the best way to get a hold of me.
Fantastic, Chris. I really want to thank you for a revealing conversation about the impact of multifamily real estate. Your time and expertise are most appreciated. I want to thank you for being here this afternoon. It's most appreciated.
Thanks. I really appreciate it. It's been fun.